11, and actually I'm coming on the road. You may not be able to tell, but not in our normal studio. But Simon is in his normal studio. How are you, Simon?
I am doing very well, although I've just had to chase the painter and plasterer out of my little studio. He's doing an amazing job, but this was not the time to be filling gaps and sanding the wall behind me.
Definitely not. I have got, believe it or not, two Labradors sleeping away. So if I suddenly break into, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. You'll know why. I've got some biscuits ready to go just in case there's a bit of barking and a bit of desire for attention. Now, our polling question of the day is about refugees from Gaza. So, Simon, my understanding is that there are some calls for this.
Yeah, it's particularly coming from the likes of the Labour Party and Greens to accept far more people from Gaza as refugees. So, as we all know, there's huge conflict over there at the moment. There's been actually quite a number come from, I think we're about 600 people have come from Israel, but a very small number from Gaza. And the other context is very few countries around the world are actually taking anyone from Gaza. So that's been part of the argument from, as I say, the likes of Greens and Labour that New Zealand should try to fill the gap and do more.
Okay, so I just have a simple question. Do we actually ask them, do they endorse Hamas before we let them in?
Well, that's one of the big issues, really, is Hamas is so integrated, for want of a better term, into Gaza that it's very difficult to tell who is who, and so there has to be serious background checks to be done. And Australia's going through this at the moment. I think they let 3,000 or so in with no security checks. And now the scandal's brewing over there because actually there's Hamas leaders and others who are there. So long and short, it's not as if Hamas is a small group of terrorists and then there's all these just happy-loving democratic Gazans. It's very intertwined. And so it's, important. Let me put my cards on the table. We don't want to import those issues, problems, and terroristic activities into New Zealand. So we have to be very careful.
Okay, well, there's answers pouring in already, so we will come back to that. But that is the polling question. More refugees from Gaza. Do you agree or disagree? Right, lots of topics to talk about today. Firstly, let's get into this one, the euthanasia report, which you have substacked, Simon. So I'll get you to explain a little bit. All I just want to highlight is that only the New Zealand Herald reported this, despite its significance, which I think is just unbelievable of the mainstream media to be turning a blind eye. But tell us the story.
Yeah, so it's pretty. I'm just trying. It's huge. That's why I'm hesitating here. This is a major news story. So long and short, there's a review committee of three people. Well, there's meant to be, and their job is to review all the euthanasia deaths in New Zealand. Well, two of them have not had their time renewed because they've been speaking out. In fact, they've been challenging the minister and the ministry about what's been happening. And you go, well, what is this all about? Well, firstly, these are one's a medical doctor, specialist in palliative care. The other's an ethicist. And what they were pointing out is that they're receiving blank reports, so reports with no information. And the ministry, when they responded and said, hey, you can't give us a blank report, said, oh, just assume everything's perfectly fine. They receive reports in writing which don't accord with what the doctors at the Euthanasia Act are saying. They asked for more information because they were going, boy, there's a lot of people euthanizing in rural areas where there's a lack of palliative care. And not so much proportionally in the urban areas. And when they asked for more details, the ministry said, none of your business. And so this is just a myriad of problems. And then they had one example of a person who does not speak English being approved for euthanasia without an interpreter present. So these are just a couple of the things which, and kudos to Isaac Davidson at New Zealand Herald for running this, but these are pretty major issues. And where I started though, Bob, is these guys have not had their role renewed. These were the inaugural members of this review panel. But as I noted in my Substack, David Seymour, who's in charge of this law and in charge of the review, doesn't like being questioned, and nor does it seem the Ministry of Health. So they just got rid of them. They didn't renew their contracts. It's a shocker.
Yeah. Okay. Once again, actually, this was the exact scenario when we were doing the road trip, and Nick Tuatasi and I were talking about it. He expressed concern that Pacifica families would be especially at risk because, and he told the story about how he would leave his mother-in-law at the hospital, and she would be told or given information, and she would just nod along saying yes because she was a very polite woman. And he said they may not even know what they're agreeing to, may not even understand what's going on. As soon as they go out the room, they turn to their sons and daughters and say, "What did the man say? What did the man say?" And that's exactly the scenario that you're talking about here. It was one of the arguments against the death penalty, wasn't it? What if we get one wrong? And it sounds like we could have already got one wrong, even in a short space of time, and that's just the ones we know about.
Oh, look, undoubtedly. I mean, statistically, it's going to happen, no matter how robust the system is. And I've always asked rhetorically, how many deaths are New Zealanders prepared to accept with the euthanasia law? 1, 10, 100? What is it? And, for many people, even those listening might go, well, we can always accept some failings. Well, maybe, except if it's you or one of your loved ones. And you're right with the Pacifica example. I mean, look, even people who are non-Pacifica, when you're in hospital, and I've been there with my now late father, it's very confusing. There's lots of terms and jargon. It's very intense. And the idea that in the euthanasia space, in this case with someone who doesn't even speak English, is able to fully consent is appalling. And we also know from these whistleblowers, they were telling us that the reports they get don't even have details such as the diagnosis of the patient or the prognosis. And that doesn't say when the drugs were administered, doesn't say how long the person lasted. Because the euthanasia advocates, Bob, will tell you that it's a beautiful, swift death.
Yeah.
Well, we know from overseas, actually, some people can linger for hour after hour after hour before they die. And they don't record that here. So it's just an absolute shocker. Yeah. And again, kudos to the Herald running this. Audrey Young actually has made some comment today. But beyond that, have you noticed no mainstream media is talking about this?
No, and I mean, I've seen the media paint pictures of finding out people who have used euthanasia and promoted it, having euthanasia on the beachfront. It's all been painted very well. One News have done some specials on it, Sunday program, etc. So that's why it really does bug me that none of them have looked at this. The timing is probably very helpful, Simon, isn't it? Given that there's a review underway, it brings a little bit of realism into the effect of this law, doesn't it?
It does. It's not functioning as perfectly as David Seymour and others say. So basically, those in support of euthanasia have been telling us it's all tickety-boo. And look, Family First, we began to ring the alarm bell at least, well, actually from day one, but in recent months, we've pointed out there's problems with the reports. We knew that this review committee was not fully personed or manned, however one's meant to say it these days. We knew there were already problems, but this is even more bombshell. And I don't want to overcook it, but these are pretty major accusations. Well, actually, they're not accusations. It's completely true. These are good, honest people brought onto the review panel. And so, it's going to be very important, the review by the Ministry of Health, but others have pointed out already, how can the ministry, which is overseeing these glaring problems, I'd say mistreated these, doctor and an academic, how can the ministry be reviewing itself? And as I noted in my Substack, how is it that David Seymour can be in charge of this review as the very man who's effectively sacked these two people from the review panel because they asked inconvenient questions?
Yeah, I think that is really disturbing when you whistleblow, and there's actually another story we've got further down, but when you whistleblow, that suddenly you're in trouble, and when that happens, that always is a red flag that they're trying to hide something. There's information that they don't want people to know about. So, yeah, this is quite disturbing.
Well, they want you to
Um,
believe it's. They just want you to
yeah, go,
believe it's all functioning perfectly. That's what they want you to believe. That there's
yeah.
just no problems. As you say, there's just these beautiful stories. People go to a beach and they get injected and die, and everyone's happy. This doesn't suit their narrative,
No.
and they're not happy about it at all.
Okay. Okay, our poll question today is, should we take more refugees from Gaza? I just wanted to put that up to remind people, because I just want to have a look at some of the responses. And we have just looked at the what people have said about the euthanasia. So Kirstine says that's a no, but perhaps we could send some greenies to Gaza. Interesting response, Kirstine. Charmaine says, love your neighbour as yourself, but they must be vetted and renounce Hamas. Agree. Philippa says, no refugees should come to New Zealand. Actually, in effect, we do take refugees. Simon, what's the general quota? Do you know off the top of your head?
I think it's about 1,500 a
Yeah.
year, and they are the UNHCR approved refugees. And we don't actually take that number, as in that's how many we say we are prepared to take. We don't take anywhere near that.
Right.
Part of it, says me, is that we don't do a great job with a lot of the refugees we get. I think only 30% of refugees end up in employment, for example. So in other words, New Zealand needs to do better with those that are coming into the country to help them integrate, find work and housing, let alone just pouring more in because it makes us feel or look good.
Okay. Didn't we bring in a refugee that was Iranian who ended up as a Green MP and then got busted for shoplifting? Did I get the connection right? The flow?
Yes, we've had
Yes.
one of those.
Okay, very sad. Nancy Margaret says, there is a reason, sadly, why no one wants people from Gaza. Wake Up Labour and the Greens. Mathaman is talking about the euthanasia story and says it sounds like abortion for geriatrics, which is an interesting comparison. Susan says, well, that's hardly a dignified death, to not even know what's happening, not even understand the language. And Rosie says, what's happened to the Hippocratic Oath? It's an oath of ethics historically taken by physicians, first do no harm, which is probably why 99% of medical professionals want absolutely nothing to do with the issue. Right, so people can read that on your Substack, can't they? They can get more information. You've done a full write-up of that story.
I have, yeah. So substack.com, just look for my name, or On Point is what I call it. But of course, there's another person I know who's even more prolific on Substack, Bob.
Well, I'm just trying to keep ahead of you. I've actually written about Stats NZ and the latest census data that's come out with a specific image there. And that is because they have just really overhyped the whole LGBT data. It's a little bit hard to read there, but basically it's saying that they argue that just under 5% of our population are LGBT of some sort. The problem is that when you look at the data, they actually double add. So you can be in a couple of categories and yet they're treating them as separate. So it may be less than 4.9%. And there's also this massive category of what they call bisexual. And to me, bisexual is just a hedonistic, narcissistic approach to sexual activity. There are no rules, and you just satisfy the pleasure. And does that come under LGBT, or is that just people discovering themselves and actually eventually they mature out of it? So I actually think it's way lower. But one of the interesting things, Simon, is that Wellington, by far in the census, by far has the highest representation of LGBT. And of course, the problem with that is that that's where the Ministry of Education and other ministries like the Health Ministry with puberty blockers are based. And one of the stories last week was that the PPTA held their conference. I also did a commentary on this, and they wanted rainbow community liaison officers in every school, paid by the taxpayer, taken out of school teaching time so that they can look after these kids. And of course, we're talking about a tiny, tiny percentage of the kids. In fact, Mike Hosking from News Talk ZB and Duncan Garner, who now runs his own podcast, were actually saying, why are we doing this? What Duncan Garner said, why are we getting counsellors who are specifically trained to help with, for example, vaping, obesity, managing social media. These are also of concern to young people and present real issues in schools. So, yeah, that was a little bit about what I was talking about. I mean, you must have seen it, Simon, in your time in Parliament. There just seems to be this massive focus and overemphasis. I mean, you've even got a parliamentary room, rainbow room, haven't you, with all the flags around, and they're running out of room for the different flags. So there is a massive emphasis, isn't there?
Yeah, well, it's overcooked. That's the long and the short of it. It's an obsession. It just, it is just obsessive. I mean, of all the stats that have come out of the census, why is that the one that's got pretty much most of the airtime in mainstream media? Now, is it interesting? Well, yes. But is it the most important set of stats out of the huge amount of data points? Well, the answer to that is no. Even when you mention the parliament of all the different groups that we represent, why is it that one gets so much airtime?
Yep.
And then again, what you wrote, and also like the likes of Duncan Garner, the obsession with the likes of teacher unions, not about teaching children or excelling in education, but trying to indoctrinate them to mutilate their bodies, take drugs, and perform risky behaviour as children. I mean, it's just, it's maddening. But as you know, we're dealing with a very deep ideology here, which is fundamentally anti-human, and just thinks that we can just all transform ourselves based on belief, and it's just madness.
All right, if you do want to comment, you need to come in just on the Facebook page, the Family First Facebook page. We get those comments directly in, and also on YouTube as well. You may be watching elsewhere on LinkedIn and on other accounts, on Twitter, but if you want to make a comment, then it needs to be on the Family First Facebook page or on YouTube. Now, over the last weekend, I went to Brisbane to the CPAC conference, which is a gathering of conservatives, and I caught up with Rita Panahay, which many people know from Sky News, and she does a program called Lefties Losing It, where she highlights generally people on the left side of politics losing it. And we found our own example, and this is Debbie Ngarewa Paka, who's from Te Pāti Māori. Let me just play a little excerpt. Simon, I had to go through it and actually remove some of the offensive words. Hopefully I did it okay. But she really did go on a rant. Have a watch.
My unfiltered, unedited, extremely unapologetic opinion. You suck, government. This coalition government truly sucks. Science, everyone has proved how freaking crazy this bullshit activity that they're planning now without any science. Long story short, there are some projects in it that have really fucked me off. You're going to see the politician's hat taken off, and I'm going to be wearing my very direct activist hat, and pretty much they're one and the same person, but the activist will be very unfiltered in her I'm really fucked off opinion, and I can't fucking tell you how pissed I am. So their politician's hat's still just been taken off, thrown to the side as the activists here, the frustrated activists, the frustrated grassroots wahine, absolutely pissed off, gutted, obviously really fucked off with the decision.
Okay, that's enough of that. I apologise. I did a terrible job at masking some of that. I'll have to get Gordon to teach me how to put the beep across the top of it. But she just ranted on, and I tried to catch all of them. Thought I'd got them quieter than that, so apologies if you did hear some of those words. But Simon, she either she needs I posted either she needs a cup of tea and a lie down, she needs to find a new vocation because she's not handling politics, or she needs to be put before the Privileges Committee for bringing Parliament into contempt. Which one of those three do you think she fits in?
Well, it's probably all three of them. I mean, look, she's pitching to her base. So those who vote for her and Te Pāti Māori are that very fringe activist base. So that's what she's playing to. I'm not trying to justify, I think, what she said. Both how she said it and what she said is ridiculous. She's free to say it. I'm a big free speech advocate. But, she's well out of line. It was mostly incoherent. But, she's playing to her base. That's what she's she's doing. It's why she's choosing to do it. I don't buy this whole politician's hat, activist hat. Again, it's sort of quite narcissistic, actually, to me as I listen to it. And fundamentally, it's incoherent. But it's the ranting of a zealot. I mean, never forget, there are these zealous, if you will, revolutionaries, that nothing is ever right until they've got all the power. And we look at Te Pāti Māori, that's what it's all about. Her and her mates want all the power in everything. And they're just going to rage until they get it.
I actually remember when it was quite big news when it was, a couple of weeks ago when Christopher Luxon sort of lost his rag at a reporter and said frick. And that became a news item that, he really had sort of lost his rag. And yet I haven't seen a single report on this diatribe from Te Pāti Māori. Is it because we expect it? Because remember, this is the same party that had a go at the Karen Shaw from ACT about being a crybaby or, needing to toughen up. So, like you say, is it appealing to their base? I just think it's a bit sad if that's the base that wants that type of language.
Well, it is their base. I mean, that's fundamental. I mean, that's how they pitch themselves. They're revolutionaries. They're couched in cultural Marxist language and grievance. It's a big part for Te Pāti Māori. So, yeah, she's playing to a base. I'm sort of torn around how the media's approached it. At one level, you're dead right. Chris Luxon says frickin', something about the frickin' targets, and there's days of coverage, and she's there and they're ignoring it. But there's a part of me too, Bob, that says there is a bit of a difference, actually. The Prime Minister losing his cool is different to a minor party leader's incoherent rant. And I wonder, and I'm only speculating, but the newsrooms might have gone, we don't need to amplify this stupidity, and not to protect her, but there's just no need to. Why would you amplify incoherence?
Yeah. You got a lot of confidence in newsrooms. I don't. Maybe it's because it's a lefty doing it and not a right-wing conservative, which, they tend to call out. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really fair point. If this was someone on the centre-right rambling and ranting, I think you would find mainstream media hoeing into them and not worried about the substance, but wondering, are they drunk? Were they on drugs? So on and so forth. I think actually Chester Burrows years ago got in trouble for emailing someone late at night, and it was not as polite as it could be. Whereas, in this case, they don't want to embarrass her, because at the end of the day, what she's ranting about is embarrassing, and it would do her damage, not on her base, as I keep saying, but to wider New Zealand going, this one again. Yeah.
Okay, let's just check the comments. Noel says, my mother would have washed her mouth out with soap, even with your editing. Apologies for the editing again. I've got to get some lessons on that. Nancy Margaret says that woman should be kicked out of Parliament. As she said, she is an activist. Rosie says she needs to go, the sooner the better. Can we send her to Gaza? Darwin says, what a huge embarrassment to Te Pāti Māori. Well, I mean, the question is, maybe it's not an embarrassment. Perhaps they're quite happy with it. And Kevin says, yes, Simon, narcs don't show respect. Her colleagues need to show respect as well and take their hat off. No, not sure what that means. Anyway, okay, let's continue. Look, some interesting develops around the whole trans sports thing. We did cover this a couple of weeks ago, and there was this open letter from a whole lot of sports people saying that we needed to respect fairness and safety in sports. It seemed like Winston Peters received it and heard it. It also seemed like Christopher Bishop heard it and received it. And yesterday there was an announcement that he's asked Sports NZ to revisit the guidelines. The problem is that Sports NZ is headed by Raylene Castle, who we all know from Australia, Rugby Australia, and the debacle with Israel Folau. So I just don't know if Christopher Bishop kicking it for touch to Sport NZ is going to solve anything, is it?
I don't think it is going to solve anything. It feels a bit like window dressing to me, my very deeply cynical side. I mean, first and foremost, this is part of the coalition agreement. So New Zealand First was really clear that it wanted the guidelines revisited. So it had to be done.
Yep.
Look, I think there probably is sympathy from the government in general that actually the guidelines are far too balanced to the inclusion side rather than actually fairness and safety. But I think you've nailed it. I mean, Raylene Castles and Sport New Zealand is completely woke. And I wouldn't be surprised, continuing my cynicism, that they'll just sit on this for a while, and at a inopportune time for the public, some new guidelines will be announced. It could be at the election time or before next Christmas or something. So we just got to keep a watching brief on it, Bob.
Yeah. Okay, our polling question today is, should we take more refugees from Gaza? We're sort of getting a bit of a mix of answers, although there is an agreement that they need to renounce any support of Hamas if they're going to get into the country. Whether the government will do that is another question. And if you want to comment, come through Family First Facebook page or YouTube. The next topic was one that you highlighted, and that was a report from the Centrist, which is a very good online news source, which we would highly recommend. The good news is that a lot of the mainstream media is crumbling, there is a lot of new sources of news reports coming out. Family First is one of them with our news journalist, did I tell you, Simon? But also Centrist. Now, do you want to just tell us a little bit about this? The New Zealand Medical Council are basically saying that doctors weren't allowed to speak their mind during COVID. I think we already knew that, but what have they found?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just further confirmation with several doctors, and one very much in particular in the Centrist, speaking out around how he was treated by the medical council. And so, yeah, kudos to the Centrist for getting and running this story. Look, fundamentally, the medical council is not a body of experts that sits above doctors. It's I'm trying to get the nuance here. It really is just a collection of doctors that obviously work together for what they perceive as the right things, but it's not an expert body in itself. But when COVID was on, and there was a lot of discussion about efficacy of vaccines and all of that, this doctor in particular, who's part of the exclusive, says not only was he basically and other doctors bullied into silence, they weren't allowed to raise their objections. And again, remember, these are doctors of good standing. But he was also pointing out just the absolute mockery that was happening. I think if I recall the story correctly, that the chair of MCNZ at the time was, the anti-vaxxers, tinfoil hat wearing, flat earthers. So it was a very nasty culture. And as many of us know, it was a culture that shut down good, proper, rational, and in this case, medical and scientific debate. Okay,
are they actually? I mean, is there actually a court case happening here? Is he just sort of whistleblowing, as we talked about earlier? And as we know, often whistleblowers, as we've found out with the euthanasia issue, they just get sidelined. And look, to be honest, Simon, here's two stories that have involved the Ministry of Health, the euthanasia issue, and the Medical Council in terms of the ability to have a debate about vaccines and treatment, etc. And both of them have been shut down. It makes you a little bit worried about just the state of our health system, doesn't it? And the freedom of doctors to speak up. In fact, the other area, of course, is this whole area around puberty blockers and treatment of gender dysphoric kids. There has been a shutting down of medical professionals in that issue as well. So it's not a very happy place to be, is it?
No, well, unfortunately, the ministry's captured by ideology on a lot of these topics. So with COVID, there was only one approach, which again is non-medical. I mean, the whole point of doctors and scientists is they debate and discuss, but there was to be only one view. And like this report has indicated, I mean, we knew it already, as you rightly said. Anyone of the contrary point of view was shut down, bullied, threatened. There's a multitude, Bob, of court cases going on. Doesn't matter if it's doctors, nurses, we've had people in the defence forces. Basically, case after case to date, the government's lost. Which, long and short, is there was massive overreach by the state, ministries, into people's lives. And for me, it's just sad that you get very little coverage of this, actually, which is why I wanted to raise it today, is that actually the government time and again has proven to be wrong in this space. And you and I know, fundamentally, more discussion, more debate is the rational scientific way forward.
Okay, and Alan actually asks us, will anyone be held to account over the way COVID was handled? Well, the good news is that there is a full review, and New Zealand first managed to get it expanded. So that's underway as we speak, Simon, is that right? I'm trying to remember. I think we've
It's
made
in,
submissions, eh?
yeah. It's in two parts. So there was already a commission of inquiry. It's happening at the moment. It's actually chaired by Tony Blakely, which was a little bit controversial because he was very close to Jacinda. But you just
Yeah.
mentioned New Zealand First. That was, part of the coalition agreement was to broaden the scope. And so what they've done is set up a second inquiry. I think is going to start next year. But will anyone be held to account, Alan? I doubt it. Now, I hope there's good learnings out of this Royal Commission, and we do not repeat what happened. But I doubt anyone's going to be actually held to account. That's just my cynical, skeptical nature coming forward.
Yeah. Gardner Gone Wild says no to refugees unless they are thoroughly vetted and the Arab states start taking them too. Mathaman says, yep, I'll take refugees if they can fix Wellington's plumbing. Ethel says, yes, we should take refugees. Ricky, regarding this transport issue, says Railing Castle needs to be removed before any real action is taken, guys. And Charmaine says, this is Debbie Nariwa Paka's loyalty to the government. She swore allegiance. Well, in fairness, Simon, politicians swear allegiance, but that doesn't mean that they can't also swear at the current government, can they? They can, can't they?
Yeah, well, just to be really particular, so Nariwa Paka is in opposition, so she's not part of the government. And all MPs, we swear an oath of allegiance. It's actually to the King and not to Charles as our person as such, but it's actually to that there is something much bigger than us. And, without getting too constitutional, the King represents all of New Zealand. That's why he's King. And so our oath is to him as a real person, to say that we'll do our best. And look, when you're in government, that's to pass laws. And when you're in opposition, they talk about it as His Majesty's loyal opposition. It's there to complain and point things out. It's not to go on incoherent rants.
No. Okay, let's continue. And the FastTrack bill, that's upset a few people. I mean, on the positive side, I know you have some concerns, Simon, which I'll come to in a sec, but 22 renewable electricity projects, 11 mining projects that will extract gold, iron sands, mineral sands, coal, 8 quarrying projects to help with infrastructure, 43 infrastructure projects, 180 kilometres of new road, rail and public transport, 55,000 new homes, and 7 aquaculture and farming projects to strengthen primary industries. Now, the Greens were very upset about some of the environmental concerns, and I just want to play this before I come to you, Simon. So this is ACT's response to Chloe. Chloe did a little video and ACT responded. It's actually quite humorous. Have a watch.
I dare you to tell the country that you want to turn this taonga into an open cast coal mine.
Hi Chloe, we support coal mining so that Kiwis can live in warm homes and not fear blackouts. We support oil and gas exploration so you can have the jet fuel you need to fly around the country. We advocate for mining, for those critical minerals that are in your iPhone, so you can make videos just like this. What's more, when mining companies carry out restoration of their sites, they can look like this.
Okay, very clever. I thought it was a great response. It went a little bit longer, but I mean, they make a very good point, is that some of these fast-tracked things are actually to grow the economy. But you have some concerns, don't you, Simon?
Yeah, well, look, quickly on the positive side, it's always trade-offs. I mean, we don't just want to start mining for the sake of it. I mean, as you point out, these extract the minerals and the goods, for want of a better term, that help us as a society, but we also try to do it in an environmentally sustainable way. We don't just do it for the sake of it. And again, it's good. We need lots of projects. I mean, gosh, just drive around the roads of New Zealand, you know what I mean. And we always reflect, don't we, Bob, as a society, or if you're having a chat to someone, of everyone saying, why does it take so long for something to happen? But I suppose my concerns I could put into two broad camps. One is announcements are one thing, action's another. And so where's the money, and how long is it going to take to get these going. So it's not so much a complaint, it's just an observation. You can talk about 55,000 new houses, that's brilliant, but who's building them and with what money? Because you might have noted the news today, the government's books are even more in the red than expected. And then the other side of it is ultimately, look, I've got respect for the individuals who are ministers, but they're getting to pick and choose the projects, and it just adds a little bit of, I'm still trying to find the right word, it just allows a bit too much influence, perhaps, from outside. And even as I've skimmed the projects, I can see some of them, it's that, well, clearly which of the ministers in the wider cabinet have influence and those that don't. So there's a lot of pet projects in there, and again, it's not necessarily wrong, but fast-track legislation like this opens that door just a little bit wider.
Well, it's what we said about the media, isn't it? It's about the perception of the conflict of interest. And with some of these projects, there's the perception of conflict of interest. And I think probably when you're dealing with so much money, taxpayer interest, then we need to be careful about that. Right, we've got to keep moving. Let's move on to the next topic, and that is this sorry site. And I think there was concern, actually, just before I do that, I found this amazing little info video about the ship.
The HMNZS Manawanui is a dive and hydrographic support vessel in the Royal New Zealand Navy, playing a vital role in supporting underwater and maritime operations. Commissioned in 2019, it was purchased from the Norwegian commercial sector, where it originally operated as the offshore support vessel MV Ednafon. Its primary functions include supporting diving operations, conducting hydrographic surveys, and providing salvage capabilities, making it critical in both peacetime and operational activities. The Manawanui is equipped with state-of-the-art systems for underwater operations, including a dynamic positioning system, a 100-ton salvage crane, and a sophisticated diving system with a hyperbaric chamber. Its hydrographic survey capability has been instrumental in mapping the seafloor for safe navigation, a key function for the New Zealand Navy. Compared to other vessels in the New Zealand Navy, such as the Te Kaha or Te Mana frigates, which focus on combat roles, the Manawanui is more specialised in underwater tasks, making it unique in the fleet.
Yeah, so I mean, I learnt a lot actually from that video. So even if you didn't, Simon, you were nodding your head there, so it seemed like you knew quite a bit about it. But I mean, the irony that people are concerned about is that here it was mapping the ocean floor, and then tripped up on the ocean floor. So either it was badly managed, it had a major engine malfunction, or it wasn't doing its job of mapping the ocean floor correctly. Which, I mean, where have you come down on this particular issue?
I'm on the middle one. I better be clear. I've got obviously some people I can talk to and have talked to, but the information's not 100% clear yet. But I think there's probably been an engineering or engine fault. Basically, the ship's lost power and propulsion, and it's then run into the reef. I don't think they've done it deliberately or turned left rather than turn right. It's got some sophisticated technology, and also the naval crew can see a reef. I mean, having been trapped on the wrong side of a reef, it's pretty obvious where it is. So that's my suspicion. Look, it's a naval vessel, but really important for our viewers to understand it's not a war-fighting vessel, but it had amazing capabilities. I've been on board it. I was the chair of the Foreign Affairs and Defence Committee at the time when it was being acquired. It's a real loss of capability to our Navy, and we're not getting it back. And the other point, Bob, is the government, as I say, ain't got any money, and the Defence Force needs a whole lot more new equipment already. And now they've gone and lost $100 million naval asset. It's a pretty not a pretty picture. And then let's not even necessarily go in depth, but the environmental problem. This is in Samoa, one of our allies, and we've got a big ship at the bottom of their reef.
Okay, there has been a lot of talk around the whole DEI, the wokeness of the forces in general. They seem more interested in focusing on diversity and employing people for that particular issue than they are of making sure that the job is done correctly. Is there any justification for that kind of argument?
Not at this time. I think there's too little information. I think it's sort of ungenerous to, and I've seen the various comments that people are making, and I think the minister responded to it today. So picking on the captain because of who she is and saying, well, that's the reason, I think is wrong at this stage. But equally, those who are running about using who she is to try and protect her from being questioned is also not helpful. But what it ultimately does point out to us, Bob, is why DEI is such a problem. The very fact that the concept is out there and people speak about it all the time instantly means in events like this, or when someone, I think I wrote in a brief article, when someone like Ben Carson, that very famous American neurosurgeon, became a neurosurgeon, but as a black American, people went, oh, he must have been a DEI hire, rather than actually he merited it. He's a smart cookie. So long way of saying, once you've got DEI in your country and your system, it is just the natural conclusion that people start going to. And I think probably in this case it's unfair. She's an experienced naval captain, but that's why I say we've got to wait for the court of inquiry to work out what happened and who's responsible. Because someone or somewhere in the chain there's going to be, someone didn't do something right.
Okay, and I think one of the commentaries that I saw was that part of the problem was that when the captain was appointed, it was trumpeted that it was the sexuality and the diversity that was part of the something to celebrate. And so therefore it draws attention to that rather than just saying, look, got it, simply because she was best qualified to do it. And, credit that nobody lost their lives in what could have been a tragic situation. All right, we're doing it. Great guns. Just one news. Media seems to be in real trouble. They're going to cull their website. As far as I can tell, it's going to be the only news outlet in the world that doesn't have a associated website to go to, which is kind of interesting. Now, I did a little bit of research and I found this report. This is from just a couple of months ago, and you'll see there that they have millions of unique people and page views on their website. Their weekly audience is around the million person figure. So it seems like there is unbelievable interest in the website. So they must be in real trouble financially. Just before you comment on that though, Ken from our staff pointed out that when they posted it on Facebook about the restructure and the One News website, they posted it on Facebook, but then they said nobody's allowed to comment on this. So they weren't too keen on a discussion about what is happening at One News. We'll have the discussion anyway. It suggests that One News really is in big trouble and advertisers just don't want to invest in it anymore.
Yeah, look, the model's broken, and you can see that. News Hub went under. I still don't know why Stuff bought them out. I think you'll see Stuff become stuffed in the short term. TVNZ is clearly struggling. There is a paradox that they're wanting to focus on their digital, I think they call it the digital plus strategy, but then they're bringing down their digital news footprint. I think they want to focus more into streaming. But it with our work at Family First, Bob, that actually you can do things like this, which we're of course doing right now, but it's always supplemented and supported by, you can jump onto the Family First website and see resources and activity and news. So it's odd what they're doing. And the other point, two very quick other points. One is the money they save is not going to be enough. It won't be enough. And the clip you showed from Ken of not allowing comment it is ultimately part of the problem. They don't trust their viewers. And the viewers don't trust them, as we talked last week, declining trust in media. So it's a bad situation all round.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more topic, and it is also media related, and maybe it points to the fact of why it's actually happening. Now, it's it's based around the Dunedin story that we covered a couple of weeks ago about Dunedin Hospital. The government has withdrawn some funding or isn't going to spend the amount needed to get to the hospital to where it originally was aimed to be because of the cost blowout, apparently. The Otago Daily Times had this on the front page that it was abandoned, and you'll notice there just out the right-hand side, it says March tomorrow. So they actually started campaigning, and as a result, of course, there was a massive turnout in Dunedin opposing the funding cut to the hospital. Now, what that did was it started a debate as to if a media outlet comes down clearly on one side and starts telling people to march on an issue and to basically say this is our official position, doesn't mean that from now on the Otago Daily Times or a news outlet in general can be trusted to take a independent, balanced approach to an important debate, because the government may have very good reason for not funding it to the full extent. They would say they have, but are we going to hear that from the Otago Daily Times? They've taken a side. Now, just before you comment, I have very little time for the Otago Daily Times because they have often come out with hit pieces. This was a piece that they did, Hate is Gonna Hate, about people who are opposed to drag queens indoctrinating kids in libraries. And in fact, they recently just published a hit piece on our Woke Up website, which is always a nice compliment when the media comes after Family First's websites, because it obviously is hurting them a bit. And of course, you might remember the Otago Daily Times blocked our paid advertisement to advertise, to talk about a discussion about what is a woman. So personally, I've got no time for the Otago Daily Times, but Simon, you might. Can they still speak independently on these issues, or is this part of the reason One News isn't coping and other media are going to crash as well?
It's more the latter. Look, they're clearly a very ideological paper for all the examples you've given. And really, it's a simple matter. You cannot report objectively on stories that you're actively promoting. And so the ODT in this case has been promoting a very particular view around what's happening with the hospital. And as you point out, it's actually actively encouraging people to march and protest. So no, you can't trust their reporting. I don't want to take us down too much of the tangent, but the protesters have a point. They've wanted and been promised a new hospital, and the government's relinquished on this, multiple governments actually. But on the flip side, the government got no money, and it's a highly expensive project, so they're trying to rejig it. But you're very correct to point out how the ODT, so the Otago Daily Times, has whipped up a storm in the same way that the likes of the Herald did around the Posey Parker protests. How mainstream media supports this at the school protests for climate change. It's basically free advertising day after day. And again, they can't, consequently, in my opinion, report objectively. They've chosen a side. And it comes right back to why people don't trust media, because we don't want to be lectured to by ideologues. We just want to know the news. Tell us what's happening, not your opinion of it.
Okay, so in 1 minute, which is all we've got, let's just touch on this topic. Google have said if the, what's the bill called? You
put me on like the news
Fair
media
Digital
bargaining or
News
something,
Bargaining Bill, yeah. I cannot understand why Google has, that the news channels have a problem with Google pointing. I mean, if I want to find some news, I go to Google, I type it in, I click on news, and then I see, the Herald's talked about it, or One News hasn't talked about it, or the ODT hasn't talked about it, like the euthanasia issue. And so I click on and I go to the news website. So Google is pushing me to news websites. So why are news websites so upset with Google? And to be honest, I can understand why Google is saying, if you're going to penalise us for pushing people to your news websites, we're going to take our toys.
Yeah, well, look, I'm with you. I mean, look, I don't like giant corporates, tossing their toys as they are, but it's what they did in Canada, and you can understand why, because actually it's almost a symbiotic relationship. You've summed up one side of it. The news outlets here argue from the other side, saying, well, look, the Googles and Meta, as in Facebook, Instagram, are taking our content for free, and they get monetary benefit from that, because people are coming to Facebook and so forth. And in some cases, and there's a little bit of merit here, some websites, I think it's like the Yahoos or the MSNs, are taking something like the Herald's content or the ODT's content and then grafting it into their own websites. But, what both sides are saying is correct, but it's symbiotic. People go to Google, and through Google, they go to the Herald. And the Herald finds some of its stuff going across into Facebook. So it's really just a grab for money. New Zealand media sees as a chance to get some money off these big corporates. They're going to try and play to people's, I don't know, is it jealousy or frustration that these companies are making a lot of money? But even then, even if it does happen, the money that the Googles or the Facebooks might pay, I doubt they will in the end, but even if they did, that will not be enough to save New Zealand media.
No.
But yeah, I just expect Google will do exactly what it did in Canada and say, we're just not carrying your news anymore. And Facebook too.
Okay, and actually, was this actually being discussed when you were in Parliament, like in the previous term? Was this all being discussed, or has this just been in the last 12 months as the mainstream media has crashed?
No, it was being discussed when I was in Parliament. It was actually put forward by Labour, and National at the time rejected it rightly. Said it was a bad law, it's not going to achieve its end. So I've been very disappointed to see this government pick it up. I know they've made some changes, but it doesn't change the substance of the bill. It's unnecessary. It's not going to help the situation. I think it's rather blinkered. That's the word I've been searching for. It's a rather blinkered view of how modern media works. And as I say, disappointed that National, New Zealand First and Active have picked it up. I think actually ACT is opposing it. Actually, I'm not sure where New Zealand First is, but National's certainly behind it. It's the wrong call. And if they think this is going to make the media like them more, they're wrong.
Okay. Golly, the time's flown. Just very quickly, Kirstine said, there's a few funny ones come through about the ship. Did they just say it was set up for underwater operation? Wokesick says, I laughed at our boat, DEI hire. This is a stupid lesson we didn't need to learn. Kevin says, because the NZ Defence Force is being tight-lipped, it is opening itself into derision and sarcasm. I guess the response to that, Simon, is no, let the investigation take place and then draw conclusions is probably the key, isn't it? Julie says the Navy should operate like our Air Force, and she says send 2 ships in case one sinks, of course. And that's the point that I made about it's like the Air Force with the Orions. And I mean, I point back to actually, I remember back in the early 2000s when Helen Clark was Prime Minister and started to withdraw support for the armed forces. And I think it's been all downhill from there. That was just my view. Rosie says, where do we get our news from when the One News website is shut down? Well, the good news is Family First has just employed a journalist, and so you'll be able to get some news from there. Simon, we're out of time. Great job. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will be back next Thursday night. Simon, the dogs have been very well behaved, so I might actually give them a biscuit. You didn't even hear them. I can hear one of them snoring, but you probably can't through the microphone. And you should probably give a reward to the paperers and the plasterers for being so quiet at your place.
I will. They've actually now packed up. In fact, believe it or not, one of them was here in front of me painting for a little bit of the time, but I think he's done a good job. But I'm now in trouble because I'm meant to be taking my family out for dinner at 6 o'clock. So we...
Oh, okay. Well, you got 2 minutes to get ready. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching. Have a great night. That's all from Simon and me. Good night.